My question. No, actually, when you were,
that's right, all times are soon.
when you were speaking about the apocalypse, when did the speak of the apocalypse today? They speak of basically something that's very bad.
Yeah. Because you have apocalyptic literature in the Old Testament, and you also have certain literature in some of the intertestamental books. At any rate, that took on a connotation of bad because most of it had to do with the judgment upon the nations themselves. And though there is another aspect of apocalypse, and that is to say that the idea of God's ultimate bringing together the people of God into His purposes is another dimension of that.
But if I understand you correctly, it really means to reveal?
It means to reveal God's plans for ultimate judgment, for the future, for bringing the world under His authority and dominion.
Because when you hear secular commentaries on the apocalypse, it generally has a sense of disaster.
Only disaster, yeah. Well, it would, because actually, largely apocalyptic literature deals with the fact that God will judge in human history. That's largely why that's the case. Now, there are apocalyptic dimensions that relate to the Messianic kingdom, and you could include that as a revelation of that great glory. And that's you might say, as Tolkien puts it, the incarnation is the eucatastrophe, the great eucatastrophe, where God erupted into human history and brought about a catastrophic event for good. It's an interesting thought, that. So that the apocalyptic literature reveals not only God's judgment of iniquity and of the nations themselves, but also His establishment of His kingdom. And one of the main points of Daniel is not only to say He raises up kings and deposes them, but to argue, look, there's going to be one kingdom that will put them all away. And this kingdom is Messiah's kingdom. And this will destroy all the kingdoms of men, and this one will endure. This one will not be something temporary. The kingdoms of men come and go, but God is planning a kingdom that will endure forever. And that is a comforting word for the people of God who are in the midst of judgment and wondering when will the promises of God take place. We need perspective. It's difficult to live in this life, isn't it, without perspective, to walk with trust and hope without perspective. And part of that perspective is to stretch our minds about the glory of the living God. Yes, Louis.
There's a tension you talk about, but there's a tension in looking at providence. I mean, I see events in history that are providential. Joseph being cast away by his brothers. You know, the fog that came down on George Washington that allowed him. They said without that fog, he never would have defeated the British that night. But I also see people that see providence in everything and sort of abdicate responsibility for their own life, saying, oh, well, God's in charge, He's in control of everything.
Yeah, if you just see providence